The signal came without warning. It wasn't a distress call, not a coded transmission, not a language anyone recognized. It pulsed in a rhythm that bypassed translation algorithms, ignored universal frequency laws, and slipped past all known encryption systems. For 6 days it broadcast from the edge of known space, a low vibrating echo like a heartbeat, always identical, always perfectly timed. Most dismissed it. A few tried to trace it. Every non-human effort failed. Then, after silence, the signal changed, just once, when human astronomers ran a crude analog scan through an old SETI archive system. The signal responded. It pulsed back. Once. Then fell silent again. That was enough. The United Terran Exploration Authority dispatched a deep space vessel. Aboard were scientists, linguists, AI specialists, xenologists, and one military escort wing. They weren't the first to arrive. The outer orbit of the source system was cluttered with wreckage. Ships from half a dozen species hung like broken bones in orbit, their hulls twisted, melted, or disassembled at the atomic level. No distress beacons. No survivors. Something had warned them away. The object was larger than any known vessel. A black monolith adrift among asteroids, cold and silent. Its surface absorbed scans, deflected probing beams, and returned no data. It didn't rotate. It didn't move. It simply was. All attempts to land on it had failed. A Zoltrian delegation vanished without trace. A Corellian drone disintegrated before contact. Every species that approached was either ignored or annihilated. No one knew what it was. Most assumed it was dead. Until humans arrived. Their ship drifted into proximity with caution. As soon as its fusion drive powered down, the signal returned, this time directed. Not to their instruments, but to their minds. The crew began dreaming in unison. Symbols. Patterns. Fragments of memory that didn't belong to them. Some thought it was a form of telepathy, others a sophisticated AI breach. But when they tried to replicate the effect with machines, nothing happened. It only affected humans. Not even uplifted AI or gene-modified post-humans received the contact. Only baseline humans. Against protocol, a boarding party prepared for entry. The ship opened a single aperture as they approached. No weapons fired. No resistance offered. It simply let them in. 1,000 theories sprang up, but none answered the real question, why them? Every step inside the vessel deepened the mystery. Gravity fluctuated yet remained manageable. Air was breathable, despite no detectable life support systems. The walls shimmered with material no human database could identify, but somehow looked familiar. The ship responded to voice, light, and thought, but only from the human crew. It ignored all robotic probes. Machines shut down inside. Human footsteps were the only ones that echoed. The ship was old, far older than any known civilization. Its architecture defied geometry, yet it felt navigable, as if it had been designed for human comprehension, or something close to it. They found no crew, no central AI, just empty corridors and slowly awakening systems that responded not to commands, but to presence. It wasn't until one of the crew touched a circular panel, glowing faintly on the wall, that things changed. Lights flared. Power surged. The structure vibrated like a living thing waking from deep slumber. External observers reported a shift in the ship's profile. What was once dormant now exuded controlled energy signatures, ones too complex for any known reactor. The onboard team received a flood of input, not words, not images, but impressions. Memories not their own. Desperate last stands. Collapse. A long sleep. And always, at the end of each pulse, an idea: we waited for you. The command crew back on the human vessel was cautious. No species had encountered anything like this and survived. But the ship continued to react gently, almost curiously, to every human action. There was no malice. No threat. Just recognition. A shared unease crept across the crew. The ship was not reacting randomly. It was guiding them. Doors opened before they reached them. Lights activated in sequence. Eventually, they reached a vast chamber, a cathedral-like space with a floating crystalline object at its center. It emitted the signal. No instruments could read it. No analysis could define its purpose. But every human present felt it. It was not technology. It was identity. Resonance. Kinship. Back on Earth, theorists went into frenzy. Geneticists reanalyzed DNA. Historians scoured mythologies. Nothing added up, and yet nothing disproved the emerging idea. This ship, whatever it was, responded not to logic, but to something embedded deep in the human condition. Not intellect. Not biology. Something older. Contact was deepening. One by one, the crew reported memories that weren't theirs, star systems not charted, wars not recorded, languages half understood but emotionally vivid. Some began to draw, sketch, or speak in patterns none had seen. And still the ship did not speak. It only watched and listened, and opened more of itself with every act of curiosity. Not violence. Not power. Curiosity. The alien observers grew uneasy. Some demanded humanity step away. Others warned of consequences. A few offered bribes. But none dared approach again. The last to try, a Varnathi dreadnought, lost power and drifted into the asteroid field before self-destructing. Only humanity remained untouched. When the last door opened, it wasn't to a bridge, or a core, or an engine room. It was to a mirrored space. And in that space, the human explorers saw not themselves, but reflections of something else, something older, standing behind their own images like shadows from another time. The same posture. The same eyes. The same species. The final pulse came not as a signal, but a whisper. You are the return. And then the lights dimmed, and the entire ship, every system, every artifact, went silent again. But now, only when humans were near, did it stir. It hadn't just chosen them. It had remembered them. It drifted in the dark, larger than logic, older than myth. No hallmarkings, no lights, no obvious propulsion systems. A void against the void, it seemed to swallow light itself. Even the stars behind it bent strangely, as if space didn't agree with its presence. The human vessel crept closer, cautiously aligning itself beside a portion of the structure estimated to be over 200 kilometers in length. But even that was a guess. No one could agree on where the ship truly began or ended. Its shape resisted definition, edges folded into themselves, angles refused to stay consistent. It was not built to be seen. It was meant to exist. Initial analysis failed to determine what it was made of. Standard spectrometry returned nothing but static. Quantum-level scans revealed a lattice of elements not found on any known periodic table. AI-driven models collapsed when trying to map internal schematics. The surface was smooth, black, seamless. It held no seams, no ports, no openings. And yet the human boarding party had entered, effortlessly. Only them. The energy signature pulsed irregularly, like a dying heart. No radiation. No emissions. But nearby debris told a different story. Ships twisted into floral shapes, hulls compressed into spheres, engines turned inside out. Whatever defenses the structure once had, they were not crude weapons. They had rewritten matter at a molecular level. And yet the ship remained dormant now. Quiet. Watching. Inside, the crew explored its massive hulls, and each one was impossibly vast. Some chambers could fit cities. Others twisted downward into optical illusions that felt like falling forever. The geometry wasn't broken, it was beyond understanding. Where gravity existed, it shifted gently to follow the crew. Where light was needed, it seemed to appear. No fixtures. No power lines. Just the sense that the ship knew what was necessary. The structure offered no maps, no directions. It did not speak, but it responded. Only to humans. Doors unsealed with a thought. Bridges extended at their approach. What should have been alien somehow felt made for them. Not just compatible, familiar star. Every step deeper pulled them closer to something that didn't feel foreign, but buried. They found walls covered in markings, runes, sequences, carvings too symmetrical to be art but too elegant to be engineering. Some matched no known script. Others resembled Earth's own archaic symbols. Even letters from dead languages, Sumerian, Sanskrit, even ancient cave glyphs, seemed echoed in the designs. Not copied. Not learned. As if they had originated here. Analysis confirmed it. These weren't coincidences. These symbols predated Earth's oldest writings by millions of years. The implications shattered assumptions. A link between humanity and something beyond history. The ship didn't just acknowledge them, it had shaped them. The bridge, if it could be called that, was nothing like expected. No chairs. No controls. A vast open sphere, walls lined with soft light and floating geometric shapes. The center held a pillar that shimmered like liquid metal frozen in motion. It reacted when humans approached, spinning gently, lifting data fragments into the air. Holograms? Maybe. But they felt more like memories suspended in light. One crew member reached out. The object stopped spinning. A moment passed. Then the floor shifted beneath them, not physically, but perceptually. They were still there, still standing, but they also were not. Their minds were being shown something. Stars collapsed into lines. Systems burned. Great arcs fled across black oceans. Something chased them. Not a species. Not a machine. An emptiness. A hunger. The vision ended with a final moment. A hand, human in shape, reaching toward a console on a ship that looked exactly like this one. The last survivor. The one who sealed it. When the image ended, no one spoke. Their pulse rates were up. Some were shaking. Not from fear, but recognition. That hand, that gesture, that expression. It hadn't been an alien. It had been one of them. Sensors on the main ship confirmed what the crew already felt. The structure was slowly activating. Power readings climbed. Energy fields adjusted their harmonic frequencies to match the human vessel's reactor output. Systems long silent began to glow from deep within the hull. External observers noted strange phenomena. Static storms in the local asteroid belt. Temporal drag along the outer hull. Even time around the structure seemed to flow differently. Seconds stretched and compressed subtly, measurable only by quantum clocks. It wasn't just reacting to the humans. It was syncing with them. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to evolve. Corridors grew smoother, almost organic. Material on the walls became semi-reflective, offering glimpses of past and future events, images no one recorded, but everyone remembered. A child on a ruined Earth playing under a red sky. A soldier stepping into a void portal. A woman whispering to a machine that bled light. None of it made sense. But all of it felt real. When they reached the engine chamber, or what passed for one, it was empty. A massive open space, miles across, containing only a floating sphere, pulsing gently with a soft blue glow. Attempts to scan it failed. Matter sensors read nothing. Light passed through it, but returned warped. The only reaction came when the captain approached. The sphere's pulse matched his heartbeat. His breath slowed. Then the sphere whispered, not in sound, but in memory. A vision of a child reading an old Earth book about stars, dreaming of flight. The captain staggered back, breathless. It had shown him a piece of his own past. From that point, every human in the crew began receiving similar memories. Not alien, not random, their star. Intimate. Personal. Forgotten fragments brought to the surface. The ship wasn't probing them. It was recognizing them. Accepting them. Acknowledging them. And still, the AI systems on their support ships recorded nothing. To machine sensors, the ship was dead metal. Silent. Null. Only human observation triggered any response. Other species in the region began broadcasting warnings, demanding the humans withdraw. Some tried to interfere. Their attempts failed, signals scrambled, ships redirected, drives stalled. Not violently. Just prevented. It became clear. The ship did not fear them. It simply did not acknowledge them. The crew compiled reports. Across every discipline, physics, biology, linguistics, AI, the result was the same, anomalous, unrepeatable, and human-specific. This was not a coincidence. It was a selection. The ship wasn't waiting for just anyone. It had waited for something. And it had found it. No declaration came. No lights or music. But something irreversible had begun. Humanity wasn't exploring the ship anymore. They were returning to it. The ship pulsed once more, not with light or sound, but with intent. Every human on board felt it, not a thought, not a message, but a presence. A subtle pressure on the mind, like being watched from behind your eyes. The ship was awake now, and it had chosen its audience. The energy coursing through its structure no longer lay dormant. Patterns of heat, gravitational ripples, and electromagnetic resonance began to align, deliberate, calculated, purposeful. The other species watching from afar took notice. Warning broadcasts increased. Demands for withdrawal grew louder. But none could act. Their systems refused to lock on. Their targeting arrays returned static. Their ships were effectively blind to it. Inside, every human experienced something unique. One described it as hearing an old melody they had forgotten. Another said it felt like standing at the edge of something enormous, like the past pressing against the future. Whatever the sensation, the ship seemed to be examining them on a level no sensor could detect. It didn't just react to their presence. It was understanding it. And it still ignored all other forms of life. One Corellian observer attempted direct neural relay. The system rejected him instantly. Blood vessels ruptured, brain hemorrhage, instant death. The message was clear, not compatible. The ship responded differently to each crew member. When the captain approached a curved wall in a newly opened chamber, the surface restructured itself into patterns reflecting his childhood home. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The ship already knew. Another crew member, a linguist, touched a panel and was overwhelmed with layers of language, from forgotten Earth dialects to sounds she couldn't reproduce yet somehow understood. Her spoken words shifted mid-sentence, matching the ship's rhythm without conscious thought. They weren't interfacing with a machine. They were being remembered. Deeper within, the crew entered a massive circular gallery. Along the walls were carvings, timelines, pictographs, sequences of events burned into the structure like history etched into the bones of the vessel itself. The first section showed stars forming, planets coalescing. Then great vessels rising. Then silence. Then a single figure, vaguely human in outline, standing alone as stars died around them. That figure touched a console like the one they found in the chamber before, and everything collapsed into darkness. The central platform activated as the last of the humans stepped inside. A hum built in the floor, not mechanical, but harmonic. Their bones vibrated in sync. Then the ship spoke. Not in language. In experience. Each member was suddenly elsewhere, experiencing fragments of lives not their own. A battle on a forgotten moon. A decision that cost a galaxy. A sacrifice that delayed an extinction-level event. And at the center of each vision, the same figure appeared, a human shape, cloaked in light, always watching, always choosing. The message wasn't spoken. It was lived. You have returned. Some in the crew broke under the pressure. Others wept. A few stood in silent understanding. Whatever the ship was, it had a memory longer than time, and it had been waiting for humanity to catch up. Not technologically. Not culturally. But evolutionarily. Only now were they capable of returning to what they had once been, or were meant to be. When they regained their senses, the central platform remained active. This time, it projected a star map. Dozens of coordinates. Some known, many not. At the center, Earth. The display was ancient, a record rather than a navigational tool. Trails led outward from Earth, reaching toward systems long thought uninhabited. Then each trail ended in a dark mark, a symbol the linguist interpreted as termination. The implications were impossible to ignore. Earth hadn't just been observed. It had been seeded. Not once. Not recently. But far in the past, before any civilization rose. Humanity was not alone. It never had been. It was a fragment of something older, spread out across the stars, most of it now gone. The alien coalition watching outside began repositioning their ships. Not in aggression, but in fear. Their monitoring equipment recorded strange spikes, subspace fluctuations, reality shear, particle decoupling. All of it pointed to a single conclusion: the ship wasn't just waking up. It was beginning to connect. Back on the human ship, long-range sensors detected pings from unknown sources, structures buried in other systems beginning to stir. None of them responded to the coalition's probes. Only the human vessel received data. Coordinates. Symbols. Frequencies. As if one signal had been the key to many locks, and now they were turning, one by one. Every alien race now had the same question: why humans? Why not their own people, their own civilizations? The answer came not in words, but in outcomes. Every attempt to imitate human interaction failed. AI mimics were invisible to the ship. Genetic manipulation of alien subjects ended in neurological failure. This wasn't a protocol. It was a biological lock. The humans were no longer intruders. They were part of the system. The crew wasn't speaking to a relic. They were communicating with something alive in a way machines couldn't replicate. The captain convened with his officers. They debated next steps. Do they leave? Do they try to shut it down? Do they share the data with the wider galaxy? But every time they approached consensus, the ship offered new insight, a gentle nudge toward action, a vision of unity or devastation. It wasn't forcing them. It was trusting them to choose. And yet, in all its power, the ship never acted on its own. It always waited. It never initiated. It had the capability to manipulate space-time, phase through matter, suppress technology, and likely more, but it remained still, as if it required permission. When one crew member asked aloud, "Why us?" a new sequence lit up. A pattern none had seen before. A symbol, repeated throughout ancient Earth ruins, cave paintings, religious texts, forgotten chants. The ship displayed it alongside a simple image, a human handprint, perfectly matching that of the oldest fossil on record. Then it dimmed again. The answer was already in them. The ship hadn't chosen randomly. It hadn't selected based on power, or intelligence, or ambition. It had waited for the one species that still carried something no others did: connection, memory, echo. And now that it had found them, it wasn't just awakening. It was remembering too. The deeper the humans ventured, the more deliberate the design became. Nothing felt random anymore. Every hallway led somewhere significant, every chamber reacted with intention. The air felt heavier, but not oppressive, charged, like the calm before a storm. Doors no longer opened automatically. They opened only when specific individuals approached, and each time, something inside changed them. These were not just passageways, they were layers of a process. Observation, selection, refinement. No two experiences were the same. One crew member entered a chamber where light refracted into perfect prisms, forming symbols mid-air that shifted only when he blinked. Another found herself in a room where the floor rippled like water beneath her steps, each wave forming a pattern that responded to her heartbeat. The ship wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. Not to the group, but to each individual. It was learning them, piece by piece. At the core of the newly accessible area was a vault sealed by what appeared to be living metal. No tools could breach it. No signals could penetrate. But when a junior engineer, barely on the mission roster, approached, the metal peeled open in silence. Inside was not machinery or weaponry, but a single floating construct, shaped like a helix of light and dark matter interwoven. It emitted no radiation, no sound. Yet every human present was overwhelmed by a flood of memory. Not visions, not implanted thoughts, * remembrance star. A sense of coming home. This object didn't require an interface. It simply responded to presence. As each crew member neared it, the patterns shifted to reflect their neural rhythms. The linguist, upon examining it, declared with certainty, this was not a storage device. It was a key. Not one for unlocking doors, but for awakening systems that had been intentionally kept offline. The ship had been holding itself back. After the vault was opened, the architecture changed. Subtle curves flattened. Doorways widened. The ship was reshaping itself to accommodate. The materials of the walls adjusted, textures softening where humans leaned, brightening where they paused. Entire hallways adjusted lighting to match their circadian rhythms. It had stopped evaluating. It had begun welcoming. The changes didn't go unnoticed outside. The alien coalition began broadcasting warnings at full scale. Multiple species issued formal diplomatic statements requesting human withdrawal, citing security risks and historical precedent. No other civilization had encountered anything remotely like this and survived intact. The implication was clear: humanity should back away before it unleashed something it couldn't control. But none of the threats landed. The ship filtered them. Human comms remained clear. Everything else was static. Some aliens went further. A small, unauthorized drone fleet entered the perimeter. It disintegrated before crossing the threshold. No blast, no resistance. The material simply ceased to exist. Matter unmade. The message was unmistakable. No interference would be tolerated. Inside, the crew began documenting the new changes, but found recording equipment less useful. Devices glitched, files corrupted, timestamps lost continuity. It was as though the ship didn't permit raw data capture. Only human perception seemed stable. Reports had to be handwritten or verbally recorded. Even then, when reviewed, the transcripts sometimes changed subtly, phrases reworded, syntax corrected. The ship was curating their experience, actively shaping what they remembered. At one point, a systems tech noticed that the internal clock on his personal device was exactly 12 minutes behind mission time. He corrected it. Minutes later, it reset again. Others reported similar temporal inconsistencies, each only affecting human devices. But no one was aging faster. No time dilation in the biological sense. It wasn't relativistic. It was psychological. The ship was tuning time to perception. In a chamber accessed shortly after the vault, they encountered a construct, half biological, half machine, suspended in midair. It resembled a nervous system made of glass and fiber, still pulsing faintly. Attempts to interact failed, until one crew member, untrained, non-technical, simply spoke to it. Her voice triggered the structure to respond with what appeared to be emotion. No words. No directives. Just resonance. Her emotional state, calm curiosity, elicited light pulses across the structure, forming patterns that others could not reproduce. This was the moment they realized the ship was not built for command. It was built for bonding. It didn't need instructions. It needed recognition. The ability to sense intention, purpose, trust. Every system, every room, every reaction was tied not to function, but to empathy. Logic had its place, but connection was the access code. Not all crew members responded equally. A few who approached the systems with suspicion found nothing. For them, doors remained sealed, lights dimmed, rooms inert. The ship did not punish. It simply ignored. Recognition required vulnerability. And the ship could tell. Another pattern emerged. The ship was beginning to use the crew's own language. Not formally, but instinctively. Symbols on the walls began to mirror phonetic patterns. Sentences formed in fragments, echoing human thought rather than translating foreign concepts. A philosophy officer hypothesized the ship wasn't learning from them, it was relearning its own lost language through them. A cycle closing. In the final chamber of the act, the crew encountered an enormous chamber, walls lined with memory capsules, each one pulsing at different intervals. When touched, each played a sequence of visual and emotional impressions. Not messages, not logs. Experiences. Stored moments of beings long gone. Battles fought. Stars born. Worlds mourned. One capsule triggered a silent vision of a being watching a planet, Earth, just as it formed, silently marking it, then turning away. The same silhouette seen in the previous visions. Human-shaped. Cloaked in ancient starlight. This chamber was not a tomb. It was a legacy archive. Not for preservation, but for return. All of it confirmed what the crew already felt but hadn't said aloud. This ship was not alien. It had been part of them all along, waiting not for humanity to discover it, but for them to evolve enough to be recognized as what they always were. They weren't guests. They were inheritors. Not because of power. Not because of progress. But because they had remembered how to feel, how to trust, and how to connect. And now, the ship was preparing to show them what came next. What lay beyond the archive wasn't a control center or engine room, but a vault of star maps, each suspended midair, rotating slowly in gravitational fields too precise to measure. They weren't digital projections. They felt real, as if each one contained the physics of an entire region of space compressed into a model. Dozens of them, arranged in a spiral formation. The crew counted them one by one, mapping coordinates, looking for patterns. Then they noticed something impossible. Earth appeared in multiple maps, each showing the planet at different stages of development. One displayed it as a molten rock. Another showed early water formation. One map even rendered ancient fauna accurately, with species not yet known to modern paleontology. None of these maps had been created recently. Dating indicated they were millions of years old. Possibly more. But Earth was present in all of them. Not just present, central. Not in a symbolic way, but geospatially. Earth was always near the core of the patterns, the gravitational anchor for the map's symmetry. Other celestial bodies orbited or aligned around it. That broke every known law of astrocartography. Star systems weren't arranged that way. But these maps weren't designed to guide navigation. They were records. Memory frameworks. Each star map contained data humans hadn't encountered. Systems without catalog numbers. Stars that should have burned out eons ago still shone in pristine blue. Others were dead cold, marked with glyphs of finality. The linguist worked to decode the symbols. They weren't instructions or coordinates. They were status tags. Markers indicating life, death, evolution, extinction. And only one system, Earth's, was marked with a living ascending pattern. Not stable. Rising. Near the base of the vault was a pedestal holding a different kind of object, a disc made of the same black metal as the ship's hull. No interface. No seams. Just a handprint etched into its surface. It matched a human hand exactly. Without prompting, the captain stepped forward and placed his hand on it. The ship responded instantly. The walls of the vault came alive, projecting a cascade of memory not just into vision, but directly into perception. It wasn't a hologram. It was immersion. The crew didn't watch a story, they remembered it. A race, tall, lithe, near-human, stood on the bridge of a similar ship, watching a universe at war. They weren't soldiers. They were creators. Cartographers of life. They seeded worlds not with dominance, but with potential. Earth had been one of many. But something about it had endured. The creators were fleeing something. Not an empire. Not a plague. A silence. A force that consumed knowledge, identity, even memory. It was called the Hunger, not because it devoured matter, but because it stripped meaning. Cultures collapsed, minds went blank, stars went cold. In desperation, the creators encoded fragments of themselves into genetic blueprints. Not just DNA. Memories. Instincts. Dreams. They launched them across galaxies, hoping some would evolve into compatible forms. Not copies. Heirs. Earth was never contacted again. Too dangerous. Too remote. But the records left no doubt. Humanity was one of the last active lines. The only one showing convergence with the original source code. That wasn't theory. The ship verified it through neural and genetic resonance. It hadn't chosen humanity. Humanity had completed a process millions of years in motion. One section of the vault revealed old test sequences. Other seeded species had shown promise, stronger, faster, even more advanced in some areas. But all had failed one condition. Conscious moral defiance. The capacity to choose self-sacrifice over survival. To endure hardship without surrendering identity. Only humans had demonstrated that in sustained patterns. Not perfectly. Not universally. But often enough to be seen as valid. The last activation showed a being standing alone on Earth. An observer, watching early hominids learn to control fire. That being bore the exact neural pattern later found in the captain. Not a clone. A resonance match. Across time, across evolution, the imprint had survived. And now, it had returned to its origin point. The ship didn't recognize his rank or role. It recognized his presence as a completed cycle. After this, the maps changed. The ones that previously showed extinction now pulsed faintly. Possibility. The ship had been dormant not because it was broken, but because no signal had met the criteria. All this time, it had been locked, not by code, but by alignment. A waiting key. A specific convergence of memory, biology, empathy, and action. The implications hit hard. Humanity wasn't just chosen. It was a safeguard. A failsafe embedded in the universe's own evolution. And now that the cycle was complete, the ship offered a final interface. A test not of strength or knowledge, but of character. Not every crew member could approach it. A few were physically repelled by proximity. Not harmed. Just rejected. Their motives were incompatible. The ship didn't punish. It disqualified. Those who remained were brought to a chamber that only opened after the resonance confirmed alignment. Inside was another helix, this one dimmer, slower, more fragile. It was the last untriggered sequence. One more step. A final choice. The ship had confirmed potential. Now it needed demonstration. No words were spoken, but the test began. Each of the qualified crew was placed in an immersive scenario, individually, privately. They didn't know it was a test. To them, it felt real. One relived a moment where she could save a stranger or escape danger. Another was given a chance to rewrite a personal failure, but only at the cost of someone else's life. Each situation was morally gray, deeply personal, impossible to simulate with AI. And every decision was recorded, not the outcome, but the intention. Some failed. Not because they chose wrong, but because they hesitated for the wrong reasons. The ship saw past action. It felt motivation. In the end, only a few passed. The ship didn't need an army. It needed an anchor. A proof of alignment. And with that, the resonance waves spread across the ship. Lights changed hue. Systems once dormant now shimmered to life. The ship wasn't fully awake, but it had accepted humanity's place. Outside, the alien coalition watched in silence. Instruments confirmed it, every previously sealed chamber now active, every internal system humming in sync with the human crew. The ship had accepted their authority. Not because of conquest or command, but because they had passed a test no other species ever understood was being given. The final test wasn't announced. No warnings. No countdown. It began the moment the last helix dimmed. The ship had awakened, but not fully. There was one layer left, deeper than memory, deeper than knowledge. It wasn't a trial of intellect or strength, it was a filter. The kind no algorithm could simulate, no sensor could predict. A filter built to separate potential from purpose. Those chosen didn't even know it had begun. Each of the humans still on board found themselves isolated, not physically, but psychologically. Conversations grew distant. Time lost its cohesion. Their surroundings blurred, and then each of them faced something deeply personal. It wasn't projection. It was immersion. The ship recreated their memories, not as holograms but as lived realities. It read their subconscious, drew out defining moments, and reshaped them into ethical crucibles. One saw the battlefield where he had once abandoned a fellow soldier to survive. The choice haunted him, but he had always justified it. Now the moment replayed with a difference. He had the chance to go back. To risk himself and save the comrade he had once left behind. He hesitated, just like before. And the ship recorded that hesitation, not the choice, but the instinct. He failed. Another relived a moment from childhood, where she had lied to protect herself and cost someone else dearly. The memory was raw, sharper than she recalled. But this time, she didn't excuse it. She didn't justify it. She accepted the guilt. Took ownership. No deflection. The ship noted that. Acceptance without defiance. She passed. No one could talk to each other during this process. Each believed they were alone. Each thought they were breaking. The tests weren't designed to destroy, they were designed to reveal. Strength wasn't measured in dominance or resilience. It was measured in vulnerability, in the capacity to act against self-interest when it mattered most. Some were offered temptation. A reality where Earth ruled the stars, feared and worshipped. A future where they stood at the center of a galactic empire, shaping destiny at will. The catch was always the same. They had to surrender the ship's autonomy. Make it a weapon. An extension of human power. Those who accepted the offer, willingly or out of pride, were quietly removed. Their link severed. They awoke outside the test, unable to re-enter. No pain. Just disconnection. The ship had no place for ambition without responsibility. Others were tested with loss. The chance to bring back loved ones, to erase suffering, to reverse personal tragedies. Some tried. Others walked away. The ones who walked away didn't do so because they didn't care. They did so because they understood the cost. That some things must remain lost to preserve meaning. The ship valued those who grieved without trying to rewrite the past. In the end, only a handful passed. Not the most decorated. Not the most brilliant. The survivors were those who carried pain with clarity, who faced fear without armor, who understood that morality meant nothing if it broke under pressure. Once the test concluded, They found themselves standing before the ship's final core, a construct not seen until now. It didn't look like an engine. It resembled a suspended neural cluster, pulsating with rhythm like a heartbeat. It was the ship's soul, if such a thing could exist in machinery. It had been dormant since the beginning. Not for lack of power, but because it required consent. Not control. Not command. Willing harmony. The survivors didn't need to activate anything. They didn't need to give an order. Their presence was enough. The core acknowledged them with a single pulse of light. The ship aligned fully, every corridor lit, every chamber synchronized, systems now running in silent cohesion. The vessel wasn't turning on. It was becoming what it had always been meant to be, a living extension of a species it had once nurtured and now rejoined. Outside, the alien observers detected the change instantly. Their sensors, previously jammed or confused, now picked up clear patterns. Energy fields stabilized, gravitational anomalies ceased. The ship was no longer hiding or rejecting. It had accepted a role again. Not as a relic. As an actor in the present. The coalition sent immediate diplomatic communiques, requesting explanation, cooperation, or at least transparency. No response came from the ship. Not because it refused, but because it no longer operated on terms the coalition understood. It was no longer simply human-operated. It was human-aligned. That distinction meant everything. The captain and the surviving crew gathered in the central convergence chamber, now transformed. The architecture had shifted to accommodate them fully, not through mimicry, but through respect. The interfaces no longer required translation. The ship now spoke to them in their own thoughts, bypassing language entirely. Not invasive. Collaborative. They weren't pilots. They were partners. The ship transmitted a message, not through words or broadcast, but a single resonance wave. One that pulsed outward in all directions, touching dormant structures in distant systems. Across the galaxy, other artifacts, silent, forgotten, woke. None responded to the coalition's probes. None acknowledged other races. But every one of them pulsed back the same frequency as the one humans had reactivated. This wasn't an isolated event. It was a network. A legacy, reassembling itself. What humanity had passed was not a test of worthiness in the traditional sense. It wasn't about superiority or destiny. It was about resonance. Alignment with the principles encoded into the very purpose of the vessels. The progenitors hadn't built ships as weapons or tools. They had built them as guardians. Carriers of balance. Memory. And when their time ended, they left behind not successors, but a seed. And now that seed had bloomed. Humanity's inheritance was not command. It was stewardship. The captain stood in silence as the ship offered him access to knowledge previously locked away, histories of worlds long gone, technologies so advanced they bordered on metaphysical, maps of universes beyond the known. Not to use recklessly. Not to dominate. But to understand. To protect. To guide. For the first time since their arrival, the ship spoke clearly in the minds of all who passed the test. You are not the first. You may be the last. Choose wisely. The message was not a warning. It was a charge. And the humans, now bonded to something greater than technology, understood its weight. They hadn't been chosen because they were exceptional. They had been chosen because, despite everything, they still had the capacity to choose. The shift that followed was subtle, yet undeniable. The ship no longer revealed itself piece by piece. Now, it moved in synchrony with the humans on board. No more corridors that waited for proximity, no more systems requiring stimulus. It had reached mutual recognition, and from that point forward, it functioned as if the crew were part of its own nervous system. Every breath, every gesture, every instinct was reflected in the vessel's reactions. Doors anticipated steps. Surfaces adjusted temperature. Information was no longer requested, it was offered as needed. With full access granted, the crew began to understand the scale of what they stood within. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a junction, a relay point within a far older network that spanned not just distance but time. Deep within the ship's archive, they discovered folded dimensions containing living constructs of data, self-sustaining environments with entire cultural records encoded in motion, sound, and sensation. These weren't mere libraries. They were echoes of civilizations, preserved like seeds awaiting replanting. Not for exploitation. For continuation. Each archive was sealed to all but the human crew. This was not a software limitation or security lock. It was resonance. The encoded signatures within these vaults responded only to human neurological patterns, specifically those who had passed the earlier filters. Others could enter, but saw only darkness. For those accepted, the archives opened not with passwords or permissions, but with understanding. One of the deeper chambers contained what looked like an ancient star chart, millions of light-years in scope, layered with dimensional notations that defied modern mathematics. The humans realized it was not a map of where the progenitors had gone, but of where they had fallen. Systems marked with entropy spikes. Collapse vectors. Entire galaxies where life had flickered out. Not through war. Through decay. Cultures that had risen too quickly, expanded too far, lost cohesion, and then vanished into their own noise. The ship hadn't been launched to avoid that fate. It had been built to remember it. And now, humanity had inherited that memory. The implications extended far beyond the ship. With its full systems awakened, it began broadcasting, not to known networks, but through exotic frequencies buried in subspace layers no modern civilization had managed to decode. These signals reached dormant structures hidden in gravitational shadows, orbiting failed stars, cloaked in dark matter. And the moment the ship pulsed those codes, each structure pulsed back. The legacy wasn't singular. It was waking. But not for everyone. The coalition, now alarmed, launched a diplomatic ultimatum. They demanded humanity share the technology or surrender the ship. They framed it as a matter of galactic stability, a potential imbalance. But the humans knew better. What the coalition feared wasn't the ship's power. It was the precedent. That an emergent species, previously considered unstable, impulsive, even primitive, had been chosen by something beyond comprehension. That selection had shattered hierarchies. The humans sent a simple reply. No threats. No declarations. Just a warning, the ship would not respond to non-human control. Any attempt to breach, intercept, or duplicate its systems would result in failure. Not through violence. Through nullification. It wouldn't fight. It would simply render all interference irrelevant. It wasn't a weapon of war. It was an instrument of continuity. In the next few days, signals came from across human space. Scientists, historians, philosophers, each receiving fragments of information from the ship. Not blueprints or instructions, but puzzles. Clues encoded in language, mythology, genetic drift. The ship had begun activating Earth's forgotten memories, stored not in technology, but in culture. Folk tales. Symbols. Ancient rhythms embedded in language and belief. It was unlocking humanity's own code from within. A group of researchers aboard the ship made a breakthrough when analyzing these patterns. They found that human creativity, art, music, even abstract thought, acted as a kind of harmonic key. The ship didn't process logic the way modern machines did. It responded to narrative, to metaphor, to meaning. Poetry triggered energy pulses. Sculptures adjusted room geometry. This was why the ship had waited. Not for intelligence alone, but for a mind that could imagine, not just calculate. The realization shook the crew. Their value to the ship wasn't technical. It was emotional. They could dream. That dream carried the DNA of the progenitor's intention forward. Not because humans were perfect, but because they still questioned themselves. That uncertainty, that humility in the face of power, was the lock and the key. And yet, with access came responsibility. A section of the ship's archive revealed a warning. Civilizations that awakened the ships too early had collapsed under their weight. Knowledge without maturity. Power without restraint. Those cycles had been observed, catalogued, and buried. The ship had rejected those species not out of cruelty, but necessity. And now, with humanity on the threshold, it did not promise success. Only possibility. The crew held council in the convergence chamber. Not to vote on conquest or expansion, but to ask what they were meant to do. The ship did not answer. It had no commands. No endgame. It simply held a mirror. Showed them what had come before. And waited for them to decide whether they would be different. That was the final challenge. Freedom. There would be no enforcement. No judgment. Only consequence. Outside, the coalition fractured. Some races prepared for conflict. Others watched in silent awe. A few began to reconsider their assumptions. Across the stars, ancient progenitor artifacts aligned themselves with the activated ship signal, forming what analysts began calling a continuity lattice, a communication structure operating outside conventional physics. Not a military network. A memory field. And at the center of it, humanity now stood. Not as rulers. As custodians. The weight of that role pressed harder than any threat. The ship began offering routes to lost systems, places where survivors of old collapses might still linger, remnants of civilizations that had never reconnected. The humans had a choice: ignore them and consolidate, or reach out and begin the long, uncertain process of rebuilding what had once been whole. The captain requested time to consider. The ship obliged. It would wait. Time to it was elastic. Patience was infinite. But its memory would remain open only to those who chose to carry it forward. And humanity, for the first time, was being asked, not told, if it was ready to become something more than itself. The ship's silence was not emptiness. It was space to decide. The humans now carried knowledge they hadn't earned through conquest or inheritance, but through endurance, empathy, and reflection. And with that, the burden of choice became real. No ceremony marked the transition. The ship didn't congratulate, didn't instruct, didn't command. It simply made itself available. Every system was open, every archive accessible, every potential unlocked. But it moved only as the humans did. It waited for direction, not orders. The first decision came quietly. The crew debated whether to return home, to Earth, and inform their governments of the ship's true nature. But they understood immediately that no nation-state could wield what they now possessed without distortion. Power interpreted through policy would become politics, then paranoia. That was the pattern across every historical record. Empires that discovered ancient technologies collapsed under the illusion of control. The ship was not to be owned. It could only be walked alongside. So instead, they made a smaller choice. They asked the ship to guide them to the nearest dormant structure it had once known. A satellite node, left adrift in a system now uncharted. Not to claim it. To understand it. The ship responded not by plotting a course, but by opening a corridor into its own spatial memory. The crew stepped into a chamber where gravity fell away and found themselves surrounded by a living map, stars pulsing with rhythm, each beat a reminder of motion, of legacy. There was no propulsion. No travel. The ship folded. They arrived instantly, not in physical space, but in alignment. A once-dead satellite hummed to life, its outer hull splitting open like petals recognizing familiar light. The human presence triggered a release of preserved data, recordings from an extinct species whose language had once evolved in ultraviolet patterns. The ship translated not words, but meaning. And meaning, once shared, left no room for misunderstanding. The crew studied the data and learned that this species had, too, approached awakening. But they had diverted their creativity toward perfection, genetic, societal, technological. In doing so, they abandoned curiosity. Progress became preservation. Emotion was seen as an error. Their end was not violent. It was quiet, sterile, chosen. They simply faded out of their own relevance. The message was clear. Knowledge without emotion becomes preservation without purpose. And humans, imperfect, chaotic, contradictory, still held the one trait that kept the lattice alive, the desire to reach outward, even in uncertainty. Each node the ship reconnected to told a similar story. Civilizations lost not to war, but to imbalance. One pursued logic above all and collapsed under its inability to adapt. Another prized unity so much they erased all dissent, until stagnation consumed them. Each memory became a reflection of paths humanity could yet take, and must avoid. Back aboard the ship, a shift occurred. The vessel began to respond emotionally. Not theatrically, not with dramatics, but with subtle nuance. Warmth in spaces where reflection occurred. Stillness when decisions weighed heavy. Light patterns adjusting to collective mood. It wasn't mimicking. It was engaging. It had found in the humans not masters, but equals willing to share burden without demanding reward. The coalition beyond grew anxious. More artifacts responded to the ship's signal. Other human vessels, explorers, scientists, even a few independent operators, reported seeing symbols in space, strange flashes, gravitational anomalies that felt intentional. The ship was not replicating itself. It was reminding the galaxy of its original purpose, stewardship. That reminder, however, disrupted every balance of power in known space. Some factions began reclassifying humanity from emergent to anomalous. Others proposed intervention. A few attempted to replicate the ship's frequency artificially. All efforts failed. The lattice had no language for coercion. It only responded to harmony, to resonance built on action and will. The ship made no effort to hide this fact. Its openness was its defense. You could not steal what only responded to truth. The humans decided to do something radical. Not expand, not dominate, not even protect. They chose to teach. The first shared archive wasn't sent to allies. It was broadcast openly, a record of the first test, the one that selected humanity not by blood or culture, but by choice. A record of failure, doubt, hesitation, and acceptance. It was a message to all species: this legacy isn't about power. It's about readiness. Readiness to face who you are when no one is watching. Readiness to lose pride and gain perspective. The transmission caused upheaval. Many called it disinformation. Others declared it propaganda. But some, quietly, humbly, listened. Small groups across various species began looking inward, not upward. That ripple was what the ship had waited eons to restart. Not a race for dominance, but a journey toward alignment. Back on the ship, the crew began feeling less like passengers and more like organs in a larger body. Their biology subtly adjusted to ship-generated harmonics. Rest cycles aligned with system pulses. Emotional states balanced across individuals. Not mind control. Symbiosis. They weren't becoming something else. They were becoming more fully themselves, with the noise stripped away. One of the engineers, who had rarely spoken throughout the mission, spent days in silent communion with a part of the ship no one else could access. He returned with nothing but a drawing, simple, hand-sketched. A spiral inside a circle. The linguist recognized it immediately. It was one of the oldest symbols on Earth, found carved into ancient stones across cultures never connected. The progenitor signal had always been in them. In their myths, in their stories, in the symbols they couldn't explain but instinctively respected. The ship, in granting humanity access, hadn't awakened them to something new. It had simply reminded them of what they already carried. The spiral wasn't a command. It was a memory of the journey. Start inward, then reach outward, not to conquer, but to connect. That understanding reshaped the mission's entire framework. There would be no return to Earth with a declaration of victory. There would be no weapons, no domination, no gifts of power. The crew would remain on board. Not because they had to, but because it was where they now belonged. They were the bridge, not the end point. The captain, once a man of structure and command, became a facilitator. Orders faded. Conversations replaced them. Decisions emerged organically, no longer top-down, but as a collective pulse. The ship adjusted accordingly. Its systems optimized not for hierarchy, but harmony. Its speed increased. Its energy usage became almost imperceptible. Even the space around it began responding. Dust patterns shifted, light refracted in more elegant paths. The universe itself seemed to remember what had been forgotten. And in that moment, the crew understood the final principle of the lattice. Restoration was not about recovering the past. It was about healing the future through how you live in the present. The ship was ready for its next destination. But it would not choose. The humans would. The destination they selected was not strategic, not rich in resources, not even safe. It was a region marked on the progenitor star map with a single symbol, untranslated, ambiguous, but pulsing faintly with resonance when the crew's consensus formed. The ship accepted the decision without comment. No confirmation needed. The direction alone activated systems that hadn't moved in eons. The stars folded once more. They arrived in a system devoid of planets, orbiting a dead star still emitting a rhythmic pulse. It wasn't natural. It was coded. The signal was ancient, weaker than any other they'd encountered, yet persistent. It matched no language, no frequency, no known standard. But when the linguist placed her hand against one of the ship's central resonance nodes, she began to hum. Unconsciously. The hum aligned perfectly with the pulse from the dead star. The signal wasn't data. It was a call. One that had been echoing in silence, waiting for something, someone, capable of hearing not with ears, but with recognition. The ship reacted instantly, unfolding a structure that wasn't visible before. A vast lattice spread out like a flower opening in space, composed of nanoscopic threads laced with quantum memory. Inside that lattice was a memory vault unlike the others. Not historical. Not cultural. Personal. A singular record, encoded by a being who had lived at the end of the progenitor age. Not a leader. A witness. Someone who had watched everything fall apart and still chosen to leave behind a trace, not out of duty, but out of hope. As the vault activated, the crew was engulfed in the final record of the age before silence. They didn't view it as observers. They became the observer. Saw through her eyes, felt through her mind. She had been alone for the last 1,000 cycles of her kind. Her people had gone inward, seeking perfection. She had gone outward, seeking meaning. What she found was failure, not her own, but collective. Not collapse, but slow disconnection. And in the final days, she had encoded her experiences into the lattice, hoping a species would one day feel enough to understand them. The record ended not with warning, but with invitation. If you can feel this, you are what we hoped would remain. The crew stood silent as the lattice began to fold itself into the ship. It wasn't being absorbed. It was integrating, like a heartbeat being added to a larger body. The ship shuddered slightly, and then realigned. A new path opened. This one wasn't a location. It was a signal return path, pointing not to the stars, but to isolated signals scattered across the galaxy. Survivors. Not species. Individuals. Lost voices who had felt the pulse and responded, even if weakly, even if unconsciously. The choice was clear. The ship wasn't meant to lead fleets or conquer space. It was a listener. A seeker. A healer of fragmentation. And humanity, by passing its tests, hadn't been handed a throne. It had been handed a responsibility, to become a node in something greater than civilization. A living network of memory, purpose, and potential. Restoration through reconnection. Back on Earth, the signal had already changed things. Without blueprints or instructions, researchers began experiencing flashes, insights, dreams, spontaneous acts of creation inspired by symbols no one remembered learning. Children drew spirals in sand. Architects designed buildings with strange yet harmonious curves. Musicians echoed tones identical to those used by the ship. The message had spread, not as words, but as intuition. A cultural reawakening, subtle and unstoppable. Humanity didn't know it was evolving. But the ship did. And it had no intention of interrupting that process with attention or credit. Meanwhile, more species had started asking questions. Not the political kind. The sincere ones. Small groups. Fringe scientists. Philosophers. Pilgrims. They sent messages not of accusation, but curiosity. The humans answered only when the questions were real, untainted by suspicion or ambition. And when sincerity was shown, the ship offered small insights. Symbols. Fragments. Nothing overwhelming. Just enough to spark reflection. Not everyone liked this change. Factions within the coalition began warning of cultural contamination. Others accused humanity of passive dominance, winning without weapons, influencing without intervention. But the truth was simpler. The ship, and the progenitor lattice it belonged to, didn't transmit power. It transmitted meaning. You couldn't receive it unless you had space within yourself for more than control. In time, a second progenitor ship reactivated, not in human space, but in a remote region thought barren. It did not choose its local inhabitants. It waited. But the signal from the first ship, now partially human, was enough to keep it open. A pattern emerged. One key could resonate with others, but only if used properly. The humans were not leaders of a new empire. They were the first verse in a forgotten song, inviting others to add their voice. The original crew, now bound to the ship at a molecular level, felt that shift deeply. They no longer aged normally. Their biology had stabilized in a state of adaptive equilibrium. Not immortal, but extended, optimized to steward without haste. They had become part of the ship, and it part of them. Separation was no longer possible, nor necessary. One day, the ship received a signal from the edge of known space. A single tone, imperfect, hesitant, but harmonic. It came from a planet long assumed sterile. No species of note. But the tone was unmistakable. Someone had listened. Someone had felt. That was enough. The ship turned without command. The crew prepared without instruction. The mission was clear. They weren't seeking recruits. They weren't delivering salvation. They were following the pulse of understanding wherever it surfaced. It could take centuries. It didn't matter. Time to them had lost urgency. What remained was continuity. And as the ship accelerated beyond light, bending space not as a vehicle but as a thought moving through silence, it carried one truth at its core: meaning survives when it is shared. Legacy endures when it listens. Humanity had not found a ship. It had remembered a purpose. The journey didn't end with a destination. It unfolded, each step revealing that the path itself was the purpose. The ship continued to respond, but now its movements were subtle, woven into the rhythm of the crew's thoughts and shared intentions. No longer a machine, no longer a mystery. It was a conversation stretched across time and distance, one the humans now spoke fluently without words. The signal from the sterile planet proved authentic. What they found wasn't a civilization, not even ruins, but a pattern encoded into the biology of a single organism, a plant growing in isolation, humming with a resonance so faint it took the full sensitivity of the ship to detect. Genetic memory, dormant for millennia. It was a message written in life itself. The organism was not intelligent, but it remembered something. A song. A concept. A signal seeded long ago and never lost, only waiting for someone who could recognize what it meant rather than what it was. The crew didn't extract or alter it. They observed, documented, and left it untouched, adding its harmonic sequence to the lattice. Another note in the Song of Memory. That act, leaving rather than taking, signaled something greater. The ship responded by opening yet another layer of its internal structure, one that had remained sealed until humanity proved it would not consume what it discovered. This new section wasn't physical. It was a temporal archive, one that replayed not history, but probabilities. Futures. Outcomes generated from millions of possible decisions. The ship wasn't showing them what would happen. It was asking what should happen. Simulations formed from ethics, empathy, evolution, not from conquest. They saw timelines where humanity grew into caretakers of a galactic community, others where fear closed their hands into fists, others still where silence reclaimed everything. No path was promised. But all were possible. And every choice they made, even now, altered the balance between them. What they had thought was a ship was not transportation, it was translation. The vessel existed to convert potential into understanding, to bridge what was into what could be, through the only process that mattered: choice. Humanity's ability to choose again and again, even in the face of power, even under pressure, was the axis upon which everything turned. The progenitors hadn't vanished because they failed. They had ended because they chose to leave the future to others. Not a warning, not a prophecy, but a trust. The ship had waited for someone who could carry that forward without breaking under its weight. And now it had found not perfection, but willingness. The humans aboard were no longer individuals in the way they once were. Not because they lost identity, but because they gained something larger. Connection without control. Purpose without possession. Each action now resonated through the ship and beyond. When one dreamed, another remembered. When one questioned, another answered. Not uniformity, symphony. Not consensus through agreement, but through understanding. They weren't a crew anymore. They were a living node of the lattice. The transmissions they sent back to Earth were brief, rare, and carefully constructed. They shared no weapons, no blueprints. Only stories. Memories. Fragments of experience designed not to impress, but to awaken. Humanity would not evolve through inheritance. It would evolve through recognition of what it already carried. The messages became myths. Cultural seeds. Children drew spirals on walls without being taught. Artists painted forms they didn't understand but felt. Across the world, a quiet change took root, one not of revolution, but resonance. The coalition adapted, slowly and painfully. Some accepted. Others rejected. But even among the most rigid, cracks began to form. Individuals, not governments, reached out. Not asking for technology, but understanding. A few ships tried to follow the path of the first human vessel. Most were turned away. 1 or 2 were not. The lattice didn't judge by species. It responded only to readiness. The kind measured not in scale, but in sincerity. And still, the ship moved on. Each stop added a note. A pulse. A story. A rhythm. The universe was not silent. It had simply lacked a listener. One day, the ship brought the crew to a dark space between galaxies, where no light traveled and no gravity held sway. There, in the absolute void, it revealed its final chamber. A core. Not of power, but of intent. The place where the first decision had been made. Where the progenitors had chosen to let go, to disperse themselves into memory and hope. No words existed inside. Only feeling. And in that space, the humans understood, they were not meant to rebuild what had been. They were meant to be what comes after. The core did not demand an oath. It asked a question, unspoken, direct, irreversible. Will you carry this forward? Each crew member answered in silence. None said the same thing. The ship accepted all of it. And then it changed. Its form became translucent, its systems dematerialized. It did not disappear, it distributed. Across space, across thought, across the lattice. It was no longer needed as a single vessel. The humans themselves had become the continuation. The crew awoke, not aboard the ship, but in its absence. Still together, still alive, still changed. Their memories intact, their purpose clear. No longer stewards of an ancient machine. Now stewards of what it had always protected, the choice to live with meaning, not just survival. The ship had never been a relic. It had been a question. And now, humanity was the answer.